Hello, I'm Deborah Malone, founder of The Internationalist and host of Internationalist Marketing TV. Today's guest is Bob Liodice, CEO of ANA, the Association of National Advertisers. Bob, Happy New Year. It is always a joy to spend time with you, and welcome once again to the show.
Hello, my dear friend. It is truly a pleasure, and Happy New Year to you and to all your viewers and listeners. We have an interesting year ahead, to say the least.
I couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree with you more. But before we talk about 2024, let's just go back to 2023 a little bit. Not God knows, not to review the year, but just curious as to how you would characterize 2023 for the industry. I mean, was there anything that you would call pivotal to marketing, or things that might have shaped the future in some way?
Yeah, a great question, Deb. And we should always learn from history, and our most recent history suggests that there's a lot of dynamic change within the industry. I mean, last year was the year of artificial intelligence. I mean, generative AI just kind of dominated the scene and was injected in almost in every conversation that we had, and it will continue to do so because it is almost the equivalent of the advent of digital and social marketing, which transformed marketing then, and I think that this is going to be equally transformative, if not more. And I'm sure we'll continue to converse about that through all of the next half hour or so that we do chat. But it was also more than that. When we look at technology as continuing to dominate marketing, we spent a lot of time on our programmatic media study to discuss transparency and get a better understanding as to how marketers are navigating the digital media supply chain and all of the pitfalls and opportunities that exist in there. But that gets us to so many other related issues, such as measurement. The industry's measurement system continues to be suboptimal. It was the year that DEIB, for the first time in a long time, got truly questioned and challenged as an operating principle for the way we do business. And it kind of is almost head shaking to think that DE&IB senior leaders are being dismissed, and some of the implied affirmative action protocols that the Supreme Court issued is actually going to roll back some DEIB strategies. So that is certainly unnerving, to say the least. We continue to be plagued by a Congress that can't seem to get its act together on privacy, which is going to tremendously impact our ability to market, primarily because states are now legislating instead of having national federal legislation. And of course, the age-old opportunity is in sustainability, with all of us, I think, recognizing the power that sustainable business practices can have in evolving core business and brand strategies, and of course, helping the planet out as we speak. So a lot that went on in 2023. I'm sure we could tick off a couple of more, but those are the ones that come to mind real quick.
No, very interesting. And as we often say, sometimes you have to identify the problems and be pretty realistic about them before you can start to solve them, or at least offer some initiatives that might bring marketers a little bit closer to finding some solutions. Well, on that note, let's turn to 2024. I was going to ask you what some of the top concerns are, but maybe I should flip that a little bit and look a little bit optimistically and say, what are some of the top opportunities for marketers?
Well, I do want to characterize that there are some exogenous issues that we have to be mindful of. The economy is one thing. In fact, the economy was a dominant thread in 2023, primarily because it kind of leveled us with a range of uncertainty that kept us, I think, all off balance. So we came into the year, everybody was talking about marketing and recession, and it was a recession that never came. And that kind of paralyzed, I think, investment appropriately. And I think ad spending was probably less than what it might have been. Investments in people also were lower than what it should have been. And that's not to say that things aren't going to be affected by, the growing wars that are taking place in Gaza and Ukraine, although they're not necessarily affecting the U.S. They certainly dominate a lot of what you hear publicly and the way, our government bodies need to react to. But I do think that 24 is a time for opportunity, and I think that some of the things that we mentioned as issues, I think for 23 do present opportunities. I do think that we are making progress in the area of privacy, where we're essentially working to get ANA's members aligned behind national privacy principles that will allow us for the opportunity to behave in a standardized format and demonstrate to government that, in fact, we can regulate ourselves. I do think that there is an opportunity in the area of measurement. The ANA has been working collaboratively with the platforms and other industry bodies on cross-media measurement. And I think you'll see some interesting pilots develop later this year that will certainly elevate our ability to analyze between digital and broadcast and CTV, and to provide marketers with a greater degree of feedback and understanding of the impact of their respective marketing programs. But one other watch out that we do have for 2024 really hasn't gotten much notoriety yet, because it's kind of about a year or so away, is potential federal ad tax legislation. Now, go back to the Trumpian tax legislation that happened. The provisions that were in there are going to expire sometime in 2025, which means that a lot of the government is going to have to start to rethink how they're going to generate revenue, and our industry could be a target for that. So we're jumping out in front of this and attempting to work with congressional and leaders and other agencies to discuss how we might ensure that the current rules of the road for taxes, particularly digital ad taxes, are maintained. And there's some concerns that are going to be out there. But the overarching opportunity, back to your original question, is in artificial intelligence. This is like a real game changer, and it's one that leaves us struggling to understand best how to leverage it, but also recognizing that its power is quite profound, and its ability to help us become extremely productive and potentially more creative may be a game changer. My only question with artificial intelligence is, while it certainly will raise the tide for all boats, will it necessarily provide marketers with any type of competitive advantage for which they can accelerate their respective business and brand growth? The answer is, I think, yes, to certain degrees, because I do think we'll become more efficient. And I think that will certainly add more resources for us to be able to invest into our respective businesses. But I think it's right now all opportunity, despite all of the concerns about IP and authenticity and truthfulness. Those, I think, are being at least addressed. I'm not sure they'll be all mitigated, but on balance, I think it's going to be a plus for the marketing industry.
Oh, I'm glad to hear you say that. Let's just talk about that a little bit more, because I know that AI was your word of the year, was the ANA's word of the year. Interestingly, it had been the word of the year in 2017, so it shows what a difference 6 years can make in terms of just mind share and so on. But I also noticed, and I was quite happy to see this, that in early in the year, in the first quarter, I believe, you are doing a conference for marketers, excuse me, on artificial intelligence, on generative AI. And I thought that was wonderful, because as you so well stated, there's opportunity with it, but there's some that feel they just don't know enough about it, and others are skeptical, and rightly so. So talk a little bit about that and what you're doing for your members.
Yeah, it's the right question, and it's one where we certainly must all dive in. Um, the thing that we can't do is let the unknown paralyze us. This is an area of great opportunity, and it's important for us to learn, because everybody is involved, is engaged in it. Everybody recognizes that it's going to change us in some manner, shape, or form, if it's not already doing so. And so the key thing which you alluded to is that we all have to become more acquainted with it. And there'll be certain areas in the marketing industry that will certainly be far more engaged in it, and will infuse it into their respective lives and their work processes and the way they manage their businesses and brands. And so, what the ANA is simply attempting to do is to provide the opportunity for all of us to learn its power and potential. And so, we are holding a national conference in the early spring. We are engaging our committees. We are producing a ton of content that becomes accessible and available. We are forming appropriate bodies that will allow for people to learn from each other. Remember that the ANA, the Association of National Advertisers, is very heavily engaged in essentially connecting people to people and people to marketing intellectual capital. And both of those, people and marketing intellectual capital, are where you're going to find your answers, where you're going to find your insights. And so what we're really attempting to do is to provide the opportunities for people to engage and to be able to learn as much as they possibly can. You know, we stopped using the term best practices years ago and moved to insights, because it's those insights that need to be customized for your respective businesses and brands, and particularly for the talent that you essentially have domain over and utilize both directly inside your company and all the suppliers, vendors, and agencies that you will be utilizing to manage your businesses and brands. And we all have to learn together. Nobody's going to have a monopoly on this. In fact, essentially, this should be open. You know, we keep talking about open AI as an opportunity. Well, the word open is the right one to do. And we have to populate that intelligence to the best degree that we possibly can, so that we break down whatever fears that we have and really understand how best to navigate that, while we better understand where those opportunities may come. I mean, clearly you can see productivity happening in production of video and creative and just even thought processes for how we able to navigate the thinking about moving to a higher plane of operations. And that doesn't happen overnight. But what it really requires is a constant building of that basic knowledge base that you and your teams all have to have in order for us to be able to progress, while identifying the core issues and how be able to navigate that. And I think that's what has plenty of people scared, because there are legal implications to some of these things. There are intellectual properties that need to best be managed. That basically, I mean, we're seeing it right now with the New York Times recent lawsuit against OpenAI about how much what content is truly leverageable in order to be able to advance the capabilities of AI. I don't know the answer to that, but I certainly learned a lot about what those concerns might be, and how where the future fights are going to be. But we really need to not sit on our hands, because this is taking over as a tool, as a device. It's not the be all and end all, but it is an approach for making us all far more capable, and we have to embrace it hard.
Yeah, no, you raise a lot of good points, and I think one of the reasons why this seems so different, just to make a comment, and I may be right, I may be wrong, I don't know, um, but marketing and technology have been aligned for a long time now. But that marketing and technology was all about perhaps dashboards and interdepartmental visibility and analyzing data and so on. This may be the first time that technology is really working at the heart of what marketing's about, which or words and images, and that's the strength of storytelling and creativity. And for this to be able to be so involved, you can understand almost the emotional impact that it has. So anyway, let's talk about one other
Sure.
specific thing that you
Yeah.
mentioned at the beginning, and then I'd like to just ask a number of more let's call it general or philosophical questions.
Sure.
But you mentioned something about the programmatic media supply chain earlier, and I know that you recently did a report that suggests that there's $22 billion in efficiency
Right.
that could be available through greater transparency. So just tell us how the average marketer might be able to reap some of those benefits.
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks for asking it. You know, the one thing, and this gets a little bit at the AI question that I really see as a shortfall within our industry right now is that talent in and of itself essentially does not necessarily understand technology and does not necessarily understand how it's being applied and how it can be leveraged. And it is so critical for us to do that. Why is that? Because when we examined some of the deficiencies that exist within the programmatic media supply chain, and by the way, this is not a knock on programmatic media by no means. What it is a pathway to make it far more productive and far more capable. But what we saw were some of the, we'll call it the 101s of effective marketing management, not necessarily being adhered to. So some of the wows that were kind of just completely ignored by many marketers is made for advertising was something that many marketers, many media managers really did not understand where their programmatic media investments were going. And we saw at least $10 billion worth of waste that takes place. Now, MFAs made for advertising may hit some of your key KPIs, but they do relatively little for your respective brand. Yet many marketers really did not understand how much of their programmatic media investments were going into made for advertising. So be smart, be familiar with where your money is going. Deb, you know, we're crusty old veterans and we know back into the
Speak
legacy
for
days.
yourself. Veterans, baby. I'm not
Okay, we'll
crusty
speak
yet.
for
I'm not crusty yet.
but yeah,
So I hope.
think about the days of legacy days of television, radio, print. You knew where every dollar went, and you knew where it was applied and when it didn't get applied. That doesn't happen today. And how do I know that? Well, a second thing is that the average campaign that we found leverages 44,000 websites. Now, come on. Do we really need 44,000 websites to be able to uh, develop our appropriate reach characteristics in order to optimize our brand? It's far less than that you need. You probably need at maybe 500 to 1,000. So think of all of the money that is going to populate all of these websites that probably have very, very little to do with providing any level of incrementality to your brand and to your business. And those are just two of 15 or 16 different recommendations that marketers and media managers need to be aware of. And the lack of awareness leads to that suboptimal investments, which is why essentially a quarter of all of your programmatic media spending is probably wasted. Now, in all candor, I would say that call it the Fortune 50 advertisers are probably on top of their game, but not totally, because many of the people that contributed to the study were Fortune 50 advertisers. Think of those that are small to medium sized businesses that don't have a clue as to how their money is being managed, that oftentimes gets offloaded to an agency or another supplier that is managing their programmatic media investments. And they just have to trust that it's being optimized. And the reality is that it's not. So I would say that the key learning out of this was essentially the lack of awareness that many individuals have to why there is so much waste within their programmatic media investments. And if in fact they pursue it with more aggressive media management approaches, like investing in a chief media officer, investing in greater amount of staff to truly be able to track and understand the efficacy and effectiveness of those programmatic media investments, and a greater alignment with the CFO, who is also largely clueless about the productivity of those investments, because if they were, they probably would have been involved to save their companies a lot more money.
Well, I think it all speaks in some ways to just the added complexity of how marketing is really evolving. I think there's two issues here. It becomes a lot for any one individual to know. And you speak to the point that not only do you have to have specialists, but you have to have those specialists communicating with other people within the corporation. But I would also suggest that that might also point to why marketing is even more essential than it ever has been, just given the range of complexity. Based on that, let me ask a few more
Sure.
philosophical questions, so to speak. Or hey, maybe they may not turn out to be philosophical. We'll see. But I'm curious because obviously growth has been essential to the ANA's agenda for over a decade now. Okay, and while that word is something that you'll probably always espouse, I'm just curious if there's been some evolution in your thoughts about growth. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning with everything from global crises to kind of economic uncertainty and the impact that might have on everything from budgets to talents. I'm just curious, how are you have has are you redefining what that means, or do you see added elements to it?
Yeah, it's and again another great question. Yes, growth is central to the ANA, and the reason why we always spend so much time talking about it is that we have essentially ignored it as an industry. We have been so focused in on how we market rather than the outcomes of marketing. And that's the reason why the Masters of Marketing was invented. That's the reason why we've created our Global CMO Growth Agenda. And that is for the purpose of getting the marketing community to focus their attention on outcomes, business and brand outcomes. How do we know that this stuff is working? And the reality is that if you look at the decade between 2010 and 2020, the average rate of revenue growth for the Fortune 500 actually declined from the previous decade, from 4% to 2.8%. Now, considering that the decade of 2010s was the decade where digital and social media exploded and theoretically made us closer to our consumer and having the ability to have a better conversation, we actually performed worse than the previous decade, which included the Great Recession. So my point is that growth really needs to be a mentality that the chief marketing officers need to embrace. And the specific outcomes need to be part of the deliverables that they bring forward. So it's just not about throwing a lot of money against a particular area, like artificial intelligence. It's to being able to understand what those specific outcomes really need to be. Now, you ask about what has evolved and what has changed. Essentially, I think it's a change in emphasis around those things which I think are been the weak spots within the marketing industry. And they do center around something, a few areas that we mentioned before, which are in the areas of data, technology, measurement, and media strategy. Take media strategy, for example, which is constantly evolving because of all the different types of media forms and opportunities, even to the extent of understanding how influencer and content marketing enter into the equation. I mean, that's just the reason why a chief marketer's job is so hard, is because there are so many different opportunities to market. But without understanding the specific outcomes of pursuing those different paths, it becomes almost impossible to essentially drive your businesses forward because there aren't the measurement tools and capabilities necessary to be able to do that, which is one of those sore points. How do you measure? How do you know the specific outcomes of your respective programs? That requires an ability to master data. Now, we spent a lot of time talking about data, but the inability to understand how essentially to acquire data in a privacy safe way so that we can get the input, the insights necessary to make better decisions and to be able to leverage that through technology in a way that many CMOs don't totally have an acquaintance with. And so there is a tendency to not necessarily dive into those areas because many marketers didn't grow up with data technology, measurement, and media strategy as fundamental components. It was more about brand and creativity rather than the things that I mentioned. So what I see is a very strong and profound shift to data tech measurement and media strategy as more crucial elements in the ability to drive growth.
Oh, that's interesting because again, that ties directly to measurable outcomes, and I can see why you're doing that, and also even with specifics like that programmatic study and so on, in that you can point to where there's been greater efficiencies or where there could be money better spent. That no, it's interesting. Let me just throw out another term, which again, evergreen, but I think it's important to always look at language, particularly now that we have robots that might be able to manipulate it. But just what about purpose? Are you seeing that evolve? Are you seeing that greenwashing and some of that are issues that are affecting it? Are you seeing people embracing, or your members and brands embracing purpose in different ways? Or yeah, curious
Yeah.
about that.
Well, I do think that purpose has been embraced. It was really hot, 5 years ago to the present, and I do think it's become endemic in a lot of marketer strategies. You always gave us the term that I totally love, which is marketing makes a world of difference, and I truly believe that. And I think that that is something to hang our hat on. Um, what we found, particularly during the pandemic, was that um, consumers are looking for brands to be authentic and to be supportive. Yes, they understand everybody needs to enhance their profitability, drive their revenues, etc. But they also need to do it with kindness and gentleness and the ability to elevate the lives of consumers and customers so that we all win. I always think of the cold water tide as a great example. That's great for the world and cleans your clothes better. I mean, that's a great duality of win-win for the consumers as well as the brand. And I think what is happening is that, well, we may not be talking about purpose as much in more public domains, is because I think that that is ingrained in so much of what it is that we do. Now, that shouldn't be a reason to not think about it or not to make it, part of our thinking and the way we behave, because we have to behave in a ways. And what happened on DEIB in the past year and the attacks or seemingly same attacks on it, you know, give you pause to hope that purpose continues to remain an integral part of the way we conduct business. But I don't think it's taken a step back. I just think that as things become inculcated within the way we conduct our business, I just don't think that is necessarily the first thing out of the mouths of many marketers, because I think it is behaviorally ingrained in all of us.
Yeah, interesting. I think you make a good point, and I'm playing with a book for later this year called "Reaching Beyond Purpose" in terms of what is it that comes next. And I have some thoughts on that. I don't want to take away from this. I want to go to something you talked about. You mentioned the pandemic again, and I'm curious. Do you think that marketing again has changed in some way in our post-COVID world? I mean, all things evolve, but sometimes we see real shifts at certain times.
Yeah, and I think I actually covered a little bit of
Yeah.
this. What the pandemic made us realize is, first of all, when brands do get together and brands do think of consumers, they behave for the greater good. And so there was a level of authenticity. I think the pandemic helped elevate purpose. I never saw so many actions by so many well intentioned companies to do the right thing on behalf of consumers. And that's the reason why I think purpose is now firmly ingrained in our behavior, number one. Number two, going back to something we spoke about just a few minutes ago, I think that there was an elevation in the need to understand outcomes. Um, we were left in such economic uncertainty by the pandemic that it was important for brands to continue their focus and on growth. and just couldn't give it up for the fears of what the pandemic was doing to their respective businesses. Now, many consumer businesses thrived, obviously. When you think about disinfectants and things of that nature, those went through the roof. But some of, what took place in like automobiles, travel, entertainment, those industries were annihilated for, a period of time. And what they needed to do was to reemerge, that allowed us the ability to deliver outcomes pretty quickly and significantly. And that's where I think that the focus in on the ability to harness data and deliver measurable outcomes became so critically important. And for us to embrace technology even further because of the need to geometrically expand our capability and to be able to deliver those returns to shareholders. And I think it's been reflected in, what seemingly is a great economy, or a strong economy at least, with low unemployment and now diminishing inflation. We're getting to a point where, hey, things are pretty sweet overall. But just the impact via artificial intelligence is certainly changing the name of the game. Now, did that happen all because of the pandemic, or was this just part of the natural evolution of marketing? It's probably a little bit of both. It's tough to pick out the true cause and effect of all of those. But I do think that coming out of that period required marketers to be increasingly savvy and increasingly productive, because we are seeing cutbacks in staffs. And we hear so many stories about many brands just having less people to be able to do more things, which requires us to be more productive. We hear about agencies that, in fact, have had to change their particular business models in order to stay relevant to their respective brands and to really develop the growth strategies necessary for everybody to succeed. So, and of course, the media and the platforms. I mean, think about the dynamics that are changing there. The emergence of TikTok and Amazon as two giants within the industry that are certainly changing the way we do business. The impacts to retail. I mean, how many stories have you heard about retail shutting down, but retail media growing even more? So there are so many points of evolution within our industry that maybe were coincidental with the pandemic, but we see them emerging as strong trends, certainly coming out of it.
Well, you certainly give us a lot to think about, and it only adds to the complexity of it all.
Yeah.
Trying to follow it. All right, here's a fanciful question for you because I don't want to keep you forever, although it would be a nice thing.
Oh, no.
I've got a couple of quick
Yeah.
questions before we end. Here's a fanciful one for you. It's the magic lamp question. If you had a you know, for those who remember Aladdin, right? If you had a wish for the industry, along with a limitless budget, of course, you know, what would you do if you know if you had a wish list? And
Oh, okay. Well, I'll tell you, I like scale. I like scaled impacts. Um, I don't like us to zero in on things that don't necessarily translate to widespread impact. And I do think that the one area that is scalable and can have a great impact for our industry, especially if I have a limitless budget, is the development of talent. I really do think that raising the capabilities of talent could dramatically impact our industry. We said it before, you said it, how complex the industry has become and how difficult it is to navigate to higher trajectories of growth. And part of that is our inability to wrap our arms around those things which can leverage better performance and generate those outcomes for brands, for companies, for shareholders, for everybody. And the one common denominator are people. And our ability to invest in people and dramatically elevate their capabilities is fundamentally important. And to do so with something that I think we may be short of that requires more, to do it ethically. ethics is not a word or behavior that we've used much before, but I do think that ethics needs to become a greater part of our industry, and that needs to be infused into the behaviors of the talent that we were just talking about. So, with my limitless budget, that's where I'd place my bet first.
Well, I love it. I also think though that perhaps it could even be attainable without a limitless budget. And I also think it could be the right thing to do, and it's also the right thing to do to attract people to
Right,
marketing. And I love the fact that you tie it to ethics, because without ethics, marketing can't make a world of difference.
right,
And it does make it all come circular, particularly at a time when everyone is so concerned about, let's call it, issues of technology and so on, because the separator, I would think, is indeed people and ethics. Interesting, interesting. All right, so here we go. Here we go. I feel very much like I'm at Masters, and you're asking the speaker what the audience should take away. But what one word or phrase do you believe will characterize the coming year?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Uh,
crystal ball moment, right?
a word. Okay.
Or a phrase. It could be a
Uh,
phrase. It could be a
it's
phrase.
actually it's one of the things that I hate most, and that's uncertainty. We're going into a year that one could very easily make a case is going to be robust. As I said, the economy is looking pretty decent, um, but we're hearing stories about consumers being maxed out on their credit cards. We're hearing stories about, cutbacks in staffs. We don't know the impact of the widening wars. And while I tend to be optimistic, I think, as you well know, um, I do think that we have a different set of uncertainties going into 24 than we had going into 23. Will the economy stay robust? Will our national election, which could have significant consequences for how we behave, will our congressional bodies act in a responsible way that will allow our digital marketing supply chain to operate effectively? And there are enough of those, and we talked about the uncertainties around artificial intelligence and some of the heavy things that could loom if we're not careful. Um, and while I am optimistic, I think we also need to be cautious, um, and be careful about how we navigate those uncertainties. And that's what we're still hearing from a lot of members, is that nobody is rolling out a spending boom right now because we're still attempting to understand what the lay of the land is going to be. And we got battered by rising interest rates last year. Will that finally take hold? It's affecting the housing industry in terms of the number of consumers that can buy houses. All of those have interconnected implications that we have to be mindful of. And I think that we're kind of at a tipping point of a number of these things that can cause us to worry, to remain, what, as the old saying goes, cautiously optimistic. So maybe that's the words that I would use, is be optimistic, but be cautious as well.
Well, I think that that's fair. And as we started to chat before the interview, sometimes you have to face reality before you can go ahead and make positive change. And
Right.
I think there's no doubt, given just a handful of the things that we discussed today, that the ANA is working hard to provide some solutions, tools, and the potential for positive change for marketers as they deal with these uncertainties. And I think that that's an extraordinary task to perform in 2024. And I've no doubt that you and your large team is absolutely up to it.
Thank you.
So why don't we just continue to stay in touch and keep up with all of these initiatives and keep talking about the future of our wonderful industry?
Well, we do have a wonderful industry, and thank you for capturing it the way you just did. I think that there's a lot that can be done, and I think if we continue to keep our eyes focused on the things that matter most, we will come out on top, and that's the reason why I'm cautiously optimistic.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bob, and to be continued for sure.
I hope so. Thank you, my friend.
The Internationalist focuses on the continual reinvention of marketing by highlighting inspirational marketers around the world and their ideas as they move the industry forward. Internationalist Marketing TV shares these perspectives through interviews and personal stories. Thanks so much for watching. If you find this kind of content helpful, please click like or subscribe. Again, thanks so much.